Welcome to another day in the Matrix, everybody. We are here today with my co-host Heidi and our very special guest, Holistic Hilda, who is going to give you some amazing and fun stories, both about corporate and jobs, but also about some ancestral secrets that you don't know about and want to. And I am so looking forward to this conversation because my business and Heidi's business that got us going on this was Primalhacker. And so we are extremely interested and really into primal ancient practices and bringing those forward into this modern chaotic world. Everyone right now is stressed out. They have anxiety. The world and time just seems like it is moving so much faster than ever before. You get through a day and it seems like every time I get to the end of my day, I couldn't get as much done as I have in the past. And with all this technology and all this busyness and all these new toxins everywhere, going back to the ancient practices that supported our biology is so critically important in this day and age, because honestly, when everyone is looking for a magic pill or a silver bullet, they're really trying to find, like, what did our ancestors do to be optimally healthy, and how do we mimic that in a modern, chaotic, crazy world? So what we're going to learn today is Hilda's journey through the corporate world and her world of jobs into this brand new course that she'll tell us about on 6 ancestral secrets. And I'm excited to learn about some secrets. So Heidi, why don't you take it away?
All right. It is such an honor to have Holistic Hilda on our podcast. And I was just thinking, like, while Thaddeus was talking, when I went to my first Weston A. Price conference, we were sitting next to some people and we were like, oh, Hilda, blah, blah. And they're like, you know Holistic Hilda? And then you were coming to that conference and they're like, we're going to, like, they were so starstruck. And I was like, yay, we're friends with Hilda. Yeah, we know her. It was so cute. So it's such an honor to have you. Thank you so much, Hilda.
Oh, I am so glad to be with you all. I love you so much and appreciate the knowledge and the wisdom that you're bringing into the world, both about escaping corporate, but also these pillars that can be foundational for a happy, vibrant life.
Yeah. All right. So starting off, let's tell everybody where they can find you.
So I have a website, holistichilda.com, where I do have a number of resources. I'm also on YouTube with a Holistic Hilda channel where I put up videos, even mini documentaries of the travels I've taken, and some shorts with some tips to encourage people. And then I'm also obviously the host and producer of the Wise Traditions podcast, so people can listen every week to episodes there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, we're preparing for the podcast, and we're like, we want you to tell stories that perhaps, like, you being a podcast host, you don't get to tell a lot of your own stories. But like, you wind your own stuff in. But she was telling us a story about how she quit a job after 3 days, and you guys, she just like lit up and started telling the story. So we want to share that right off the bat with our audience.
Yeah. So nobody knows the story. I haven't told anyone the story. I don't even know if I've told my own children the story. But basically, right out of college, you're kind of, I would say, desperate, thinking I need to get a job. This is at least my former way of thinking. And I literally just took this job at this insurance company. I don't know how I found out about it. And the woman I was working for, my supervisor, first of all, she was blaring music that was like my music from, my decade. And she was playing it as if she were 20-something herself. So I was like, this is weird. But okay, that aside, she was a screamer. She would yell at me and others in the office. She'd be like, put away the files. And we were like, all doing the best we could. I had only been there a few days, and I was like, you know what? I know I need to leave this job because the energy that we surround ourselves with matters, right? So I was like, I'm not going to be in this situation. But I was also young and, believe it or not, a little timid. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I didn't know how to face this yelling person. It scared me. So I left her a note and I said, I'm not going to work under these conditions. I'm never coming back here again.
Oh my gosh. The note, was it like a Post-it note or was it like actually a written letter?
Oh, I hand wrote it. But this wasn't going to be my career path anyway, but sometimes you'll take a job because you want money in your pocket and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, and that's fine, but you have to make sure that it doesn't put you down. And I knew enough that I did not want to be put down by this woman who did not have to yell to me about files. I could put away files, but I didn't need anyone, breathing down my neck and giving me a hard time.
Oh my God, that's so crazy. That reminds me of yes, I used to watch Sex in the City, but there's an episode when they talk about he broke up with me on a Post-it. The whole episode was about he broke up with me on a Post-it. Can you imagine someone doing that? But like, you broke up with them.
I did.
On a Post-it. So
I did.
Yay.
However you need to do it, do it.
Well, I think that's so typical of most people coming out of college with a bunch of debt, and you've been ingrained with this idea that I'm going to go to college, I'm going to take on this debt, and I'm going to take a job, not become an entrepreneur, not figure out what your passion is, but I need to get a job because now I have debt, and you probably bought a new car, after college, and then you're going to pay for an apartment and you're on your own. And so that's really the system that we walk into is go to college, rack up debt, now get a good job. And most people walk into that job and find out it is nothing even close to how they imagined working after college would be. You have these fantasies from the movies and television, and you think like, oh, my job's going to be so glamorous, and I'm going to have all this free time, and I'm going to make all this money, and it's going to be so much fun, like joking with my colleagues at the office. And then you get there and you're like, what did I walk into?
Yes. And notice you're inside in these corporate jobs and these government jobs, which I got next, actually, under fluorescent lights. People are unhappy. They're worn down. So notice what's happening to the people around you. And if you want to be in that space. So I knew immediately with this lady, no way. But later I was able to parlay my interests, as I put it, my hobby into a jobby, which was really fulfilling.
So that's really what I want to touch on in this podcast is you are one of the few people that we know that have been able to take your passion and turn it into income and your life's work. And that's pretty rare. It's the kind of thing that everyone hears about and everybody wants to do. But how did you identify your passion in the first place? Like, you went to college, you got this job, you worked for the government, you're under fluorescent lights.
Yes.
Like, your health is deteriorating and you probably don't know why. So like, what did you do?
Well, this is funny because Thaddeus and Heidi, I actually turned 3 of my hobbies into jobbies. So the first one was exercise. I was always a fitness professional. Well, not always, not since when I was born, but I became a fitness professional certified by the American Council on Exercise. I taught classes and I was like, I really like this. I became a part of a group called Body and Soul Fitness because it was physical workouts like body pump and boot camp and all these things. And we did it to Christian music. So they felt like, okay, that lifts your soul up. It was lovely. I also noticed, as I was at first a teacher at a very minimal pay scale, however many students you have would kind of correlate and correspond to your pay. So that was okay, but I was ambitious. I did want to do more and I loved it, right? So I looked at the structure of this organization. The next person up was what they called an area director. And let's say there were 6 in the US. Those people never budged. Like, I could see the writing on the wall. These people are never moving. So I wasn't just like, oh, well, I guess I'll just keep teaching and stay at this level. I decided to put my all into it. And so when we would have conferences, I said, you know what, I'll run the soundboard. I started volunteering in little subtle ways to help to show I'm in this for life. I'm in this because I love it and I want to support what you're doing. And so I think the head of the organization saw that I was all in. Later, she leapfrogged me from teacher. I never became an area director. I became a regional director. So she moved me up. So this is an important thing I want to say to you all and to the listener is this. You can't just kind of wish your way into a position of freedom or the position of your dreams. You need to work hard and work excellently. So they knew I was giving my all, but I wasn't just haphazard about it. Like, I guess I'll show up when I feel like it at the conference. No, I was there early. I was checking people's sound mics. By the way, I knew nothing about audio at the time. So that was one that I parlayed not only into a regional director position, later they made me the director of communications. Again, they saw my passion, they saw my enthusiasm, but they saw my work ethic, and they knew I could deliver. So that was one hobby that I turned into a jobby. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, and I just want to break in and say that's one of the things that we love teaching is this mindset where you moved yourself there without, it sounds like without any coaching, And most people have no idea. They see themselves as an employee of their company, whatever that company be, and they're told where to sit, what to work on, what time to come in, and how they're supposed to do their work. And yet, you didn't take that and stick with it. You created a mindset of more of an entrepreneur. Like, what does an entrepreneur do? They show up early. What do they do with audio? I don't know how to do it, so I'll figure it out. Like, I'll just make it work. And what did that lead to? Like, you were promoted,
Yes.
and then you were put into the role that you wanted. So you can't just fantasize. Like, you didn't just fantasize, Hilda, about where you wanted to be. Of course, you had to do that, but then you had to take action in order to
Yes.
get there.
And it's so fascinating too, because in this other job I had, so I'm not the best singer in the world. I'm not the best guitar player, but I liked singing, and I really, it was a hobby of mine. I play guitar for children at my kids' school and whatnot. Anyway, I saw some people in the front of my church leading worship. So in other words, instead of traditional organ and choir, in some churches they have this contemporary music where someone's playing guitar, they've got a drummer, the whole shebang. And I was like, I really wasn't just like, I was like, I want to do this. I knew I wanted to do it. And so I had the vision. So that's also important. Not just the work ethic, but a vision, an idea. And I knew I wanted to do it. So I remember they were looking for people to help with a band that was going to play for evening services. But I was traveling to Mexico. Long story short, I remember jogging down in Mexico. I like to stay in shape, as you know. I was like jogging, and I was like, I really want to be like the main worship leader of this team on Sunday nights. But again, remember, I wasn't the best singer. I wasn't the best guitar player. But I also was away when they were having these auditions. I came back, and I don't know how it happened, except for the vision. The pastor's like, oh yeah, we want you to be the leader. Like, they let me be the leader of the group because I had the passion, the vision, the interest, all the things. And I guess in some way, a kind of calling to it. And so then I was able to start doing this as a job. Different churches, through a number of circumstances, I was able to become a worship leader for 15 years at different churches. I was a worship leader. At one church, I started the contemporary worship service. At two other churches, I took the bull by the horns, and the last church I worked with had thousands of members. So it was really exciting. And what was cool was that a thing that you think would be a weakness, that I couldn't sing or play that well, became a strength. Why? Because I could point to Sarah and say, hey, Sarah, you take this solo. And hey, John, you play this. I mean, I was still playing, but it was my enthusiasm and my spirit that I brought to it. I think that lifted me up to that position.
That's awesome. So what I heard, what you just talked about, Hilda, is as a mindset coach myself, you knew what you wanted. And when, like, look at how strong that magnetism is in, like, just knowing what you want. And I know a lot of people, like, I see a lot of people struggle in the, coaching communities of like, well, what do I do if I don't know what I want? But look at you, like you weren't really even conscious of it.
No.
Right? It was like it was so strong within you. You were just it. Like, you were being it, right?
Yes.
And you knew what you wanted. I mean, your whole being knew what you wanted. And then also you talked about Thaddeus said something about fantasizing, but you were visualizing, right?
Nice distinction.
It is. And so, like, you can fantasize all day long, right? Like, not in a weird way, but but like we all have these fantasies, like the grass is always greener and, whatever. But if you can translate that and turn that into like a more realistic visualization, right? You saw yourself as this person, and you were doing both. You were visualizing and wanting it into being, right?
Yes, and notice that I didn't let my quote-unquote limitations hold me back. I think at the time I thought I was a pretty good singer and guitar player, so maybe I just didn't know. I wasn't aware. But I will tell you this. So the third hobby I turned into a jobby, which is now pretty much my full-time jobby, is podcasting. And so what happened was I love this group, the Weston A. Price Foundation. Because I used to be a translator, I thought, I'll get their brochures and I'll kind of spiff them up, make the graphics or at least the layout and the writing better. Until there was an opportunity, they wanted to send someone to Kenya to represent them, to talk about ancestral wisdom. And literally it was a volunteer situation, but I raised my hand. Anyway, it was there that I tapped into the indigenous wisdom. I met this warrior, this Maasai warrior, and he was over like 100 years old, and he kind of came up to where I was staying with just a little walking stick, and I was like, this man has stories. I just knew it. I grabbed my phone. And I didn't have the idea yet of becoming a podcast host, mind you, exactly, though a couple seeds had been planted. But I I thought, I need to get this man's stories on my phone. And so I hit voice memo, recorded them, came back from that trip. And I said to the head of this Weston A. Price Foundation, I said, hey, I think you should have a podcast lifting up these voices, lifting up the authors and the experts in this alternative health space. I said, and I will host and produce it. And she said, yes, but the reason this is funny is because I had never podcasted before. So I had no experience and I didn't know anything about it except I'd listened to like Serial, one of the early shows. But I guess I knew I wanted to communicate and I had this passion and this vision again. And so she said, yes, maybe swept up by my enthusiasm, but in part also, here's a strategy for anyone wanting to escape corporate. I had demonstrated my trustworthiness to the head of the foundation because before going to Kenya, she let me come to their staff meetings. So every other week I showed up. Again, I was just a volunteer at that time. She saw my enthusiasm. She saw that I was planning out the trip, that I was trustworthy and all these things. So as they say in the business, she knew me, she liked me, she trusted me, and that enabled her to be ready to say yes to the podcasting. If she had ever just gotten a cold email, someone saying, you should have a podcast, it would have ended up in the circular file, as I say, or in the trash can. But instead, she knew me and thought, okay, I can trust this person. Plus, when I presented the idea to her, I said, you don't even have to pay me much. We'll get money through the sponsors. So she's like, okay, I've got nothing to lose. And now get this, we're at 13 million downloads. They're paying me a good amount, a fair amount, including a portion of the ad revenue, all because, I planted the idea to her. But this is the other thing I want you to know. At one point, I was podcasting, I was worship leading, and I was leading the stuff for the Christian fitness group. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a lot. So I had to pare down. So it's really fun, too, to remember life is a long time. If you don't like what you're doing just yet, your hobby could turn into a jobby. Be patient, keep at it, and then see how things are going to flow.
Oh my gosh. I love that story for a number of reasons because I'm in the corporate world and I've been there for almost 30 years now, which sounds crazy to me that it's been that long, but it has. And so, Hilda, when you are telling these stories, I think what I see is that most people, they lead lives of quiet desperation. And you did not choose that life. You did one thing, which was you spoke into the world what it is that you wanted in each case. You didn't just fantasize or visualize. You didn't just take action, but I think there's like a magic to saying out loud what it is that you want. Like, how would anyone know that you wanted to be a podcast host for the Wise Traditions podcast or the Weston A. Price Foundation if you hadn't said what you wanted?
Yeah.
And you speaking that, same with the worship leader. If you didn't tell somebody, that probably would never have happened. And what I see in the corporate world is people want all these things, but they'll never say it out loud because they think it'll hurt their career. What if the boss is going to promote me to this role, but I say I want to do this other thing, and now they're not going to promote me, or whatever it is? People stay quiet, and you didn't stay quiet. And my question is, you moved from worship leader to this podcast host, and like millions of downloads, like very successful. So the second thing you did as an entrepreneur that's different from how most people in corporate are thinking is that you took action even if you didn't know what you were doing. So what, describe to me, you became this famous podcast host, and yes, you're famous. and how did you go from leading worships at your church to getting in front of the foundation at Weston A. Price? You didn't just arrive at their offices and say, this is what I want to do. So describe to somebody, what were the steps and how did you end up there?
Well, one thing I'll recommend, and I think I mentioned this at last year's mastermind, is that people look for threads of not just passion, but of abilities in their life. So when I was in third grade, I was on the stage at the talent show singing a little song. So isn't that interesting that years later, decades later, I became a worship leader? I was on the debate team in high school. So then I became a communicator. I was the director of communications for this fitness group. It's just interesting. So when you look, somebody likened it in one of the books I read a while ago as telephone poles. See what telephone poles, how they're connected over the years. So I was a communicator. So maybe that's one reason I spoke up, Thaddeus. I don't know. But I also was willing to start small. So with the foundation, I was a chapter leader first. What is that? It's a volunteer person who says, I'll help people find real food in the area. Because I like them. Like I told you, I like them. So again, I didn't just wait to see what's going to happen one day. Maybe I'll be a podcast. No, I started with just the smallest thing they have as chapter leader. And then, gosh, I'm trying to think how it really, it did happen that I volunteered. And what's funny is the head of the foundation, I volunteered to go to Kenya. She said, oh yeah, this Maasai person contacted us and we're going to send some people over. I'm going to ask for a couple of volunteers. And so I raised my hand and I was one of the first people. She only sent 2 people. But then somehow, since I started to participate with them more and show up at these staff meetings, I noticed they were getting an influx of requests of people that wanted to go to Kenya on their behalf because it was all, expenses covered. It was a kind of nice situation. And I said to her, do you want to vet these people in terms of how much they can communicate? I'm going to hold on tightly to the position I had of already being able to go. She said, no, first come, first served. So I think there is a bit of, I don't want to call it random chance because I believe in divine providence, but what are the chances that I was the first one to raise my hand? It was the opportunity that I walked through, but then I also made some opportunities. And I also noticed how I felt. So when I was a worship leader, this kid who was 14 in my band played the violin. He was kind of precocious. He played the violin. He played a lot of instruments and percussion and all these other things. And at one point he said to me, oh, Hilda, I'm starting a podcast. And I was like, what? Because I thought, okay, I got a little jealous, I'm not going to lie. And I thought, if this 14-year-old can start a podcast, I can start a podcast too. But I hadn't decided what about yet. So I had that idea. The other thing is I was a blogger. So this is another thing to do. Besides the signpost exercise, listen to what the people around you say you might, could, should do. This is a Texas thing. They were like, you might, could, get over there. I don't know why I'm talking like I'm Texan. But anyway, so a friend of mine said to me one time, literally, she's like, that last blog post you did sucked. She said, you talked about sugar addiction. You have no idea what you're talking about because I have it. And you had bad ideas. She goes, you should be a signpost and interview people who are experts. And she said, that way you'll guide people in the right direction. She said, you should have a podcast. And when I was done talking to her, I burst into tears because I'm a writer. I love writing. I was so disappointed. And later I realized, oh, yes, there are 3 vantage points from which you can write as an author or podcast as the sage, the person everyone knows you're an expert, or the signpost pointing to the sage, or the fellow struggler, and people want to see your journey. But what I did not know at the time, which has become so fun for me, is a signpost can turn into a sage. Look at Katie Couric or Anderson Cooper. Everyone at first was just looking at them for the news, and now they look to them for answers and direction. So, or Oprah Winfrey, right? So it's kind of exciting. I'm really happy to even process this with you because I think there are things people can do. Pay attention to what people are asking of them, look at the signposts, and step into opportunities that are divinely orchestrated for you.
Okay, so when you were talking about the telephone poles.
Yes.
Okay, there's a picture of me back in 3rd grade. I'm not kidding. Or in 5th grade. And I am playing in Alice in Wonderland, the caterpillar, and I had this crazy. Do you know what the caterpillar is doing? Sitting on the mushroom.
Yeah.
Smoking a hookah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was the caterpillar, and I had to go stand up in front of the whole auditorium, and I had to sing the song, the vowel song. Do you know that?
No.
A-E-I-O-U. I had to sing that song. It was slow and weird, and I had this green base painted and this big costume on. So what do you think that means for me in my? I'm just teasing.
No, but it's interesting because you are willing to experiment with who you are. You're willing to shift. I don't know if it was the caterpillar or the Cheshire cat who did that, but you're willing to shift. You used to focus on art. You still will come back to that at the right time, but now you're shifting into a coaching place. So it's kind of cool. I like it.
I just thought that was funny. I was like,
I know.
That you draw threads from
Yes.
all that in your history. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. Okay.
And I'm trying to connect the dots.
Exactly. So Hilda, tell us, you've been saying the foundation and Weston A. Price, what is the Weston A. Price Foundation and why were you even interested in it in the first place? You were a chapter leader and now you work directly for the foundation and now you're the most famous person, the most famous woman in all of Weston A. Price, I would argue.
Right. Oh, thank you. It's been amazing journey. So what I did not tell you is I was born with a birth defect and I had a hole between the lower two ventricles of my heart, which meant my blood wasn't oxygenating properly. The doctors didn't know how long I was going to live. Literally, my parents took no baby pictures of me. I guess I'm a little resentful. I need to learn to let that go. But I'm like, why are there no baby pictures? They didn't know how long I was going to live. I guess they wanted to be like, easy come, easy go. I mean, literally, I don't know. I have to ask them about that some more. But also, maybe I just need to forgive and forget. But the point I'm trying to make is because my health was fragile, at least as a child, and then I had open heart surgery when I was 9, I really wanted to honor it and treasure it and live the best life possible I could, especially physically. So I became this fitness professional, and I thought that's all there was to well-being. I was like, just keep moving. Whatever you eat, just burn it off. It doesn't matter. Until a dear friend of mine became sick, and she told me about the Weston A. Price Foundation because doctors had no answers for her chronic fatigue. And Sally and this foundation, this group that I had never heard of either, it's a mouthful, right? So that's why I like to call them kind of the Wise Traditions group, because that's easier to remember. But they said, good health isn't found in pharmaceuticals or, the Shape Up Beachbody program, that's like more profound than that. It can be found in looking to the past for good health today. I was like, oh, I like this. So it resonated with me, and I started looking into it. The first thing I looked into that they had to offer was food. So they said, what you eat matters. And I was like, oh, I guess it does, because just like you want to put the right fuel in a car, you got to put the right stuff in you. And so they hearken back to whole, real foods, eating seasonally and locally, and foods that are nutrient dense. So I would argue that today we often are overfed and undernourished. We're just chowing down on the chips or the protein bars or whatever. And like, that's okay. That'll sustain you a little bit, but it doesn't have the profound nutrition the way it's found in nature and like an egg or seafood or meat or fats, So I resonated with it. And when I started making changes with my diet, I was like, okay, this is a wonderful, wonderful place to start. And what's nice about the Wise Traditions is I have come to find, because I've continued some of the travels, Kenya was just the beginning, that indigenous people groups, some of them are still living according to their traditions. And it's more than just food that keeps us well. And that's why I decided to pursue this 6 Ancestral Secrets and to get them out to the world through a course. And I'm working on a book because I think some of these are super simple, but they're often accessible and free. And we just need to be reminded of what they are.
Awesome. So, it makes me think about our school system, actually, when you were talking about, like our ancestral, way of eating and living and what happens in a public school at this day and age. Like, we know so much stuff. There's this age of information. We know all these. We are still locked into this old way of like ultra processed foods and the food pyramid. And the American, you guys, I always thought it was interesting because when I was in grade school, I'd look in the lunchroom and I'd see these posters, got milk, like all the things, Michael Jordan, right? Like on the poster, and he's like milk mustache and whatever. And then it would say provided by the American Dairy Association, right? And they're always sponsored by some lobbied, right, entity. And I was always like, oh, that's weird. Like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense, right? And then you get older and wiser, right?
Yes.
And you're like, wait, they had an agenda, right? And then the food pyramid in itself and the SAD, the standard American diet, and how it's so detrimental to our holistic well-being. And so like you were so open and receptive to like something within you like sparked when you heard that. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how did that resonate with you? Like what kind, you were like bing bing,
Yes.
what was that?
Well, because I think I was already a person of faith, and I thought this makes so much sense that what God makes is going to nourish me better than what man makes. And even if the package says on it, all natural, heart healthy, added vitamins and minerals, the fact that it's in a package at all tells you something. And by the way, the marketers are the ones that put that on the box or on the package. It's not some nutritionist that's analyzing it. They're just trying to sell you something. So I already had kind of I would say a healthy skepticism of what was being marketed toward me. I remember even with my kids when we were little, this is kind of a cool side story, but important to note. We would watch TV, some, not a lot. And I would always, always, always mute the commercials because I thought I do not want them to tell us what to do. And so it was just a habit. We would mute the commercials. And yeah, now I know that even in the shows, they could have commercials or, there's promotions going on behind the scenes. But I will say this, your diet is more than just what you eat. It's everything you consume. So if you want your life to change, don't tamp down the symptoms of that quiet desperation where you might be like, okay, I guess I'm just going to chill out and watch Netflix now. I hate my job. I'm just going to hang out here. No, you've got to turn some of that stuff off so you can hear your deep knowing and your inner intuition and maybe even what your ancestors or God wants you to do. You have to make space for that. I wish one of the secrets was silence. That might be a bonus secret, but to do that is risky and scary. We're so used to filling our solitary or sedentary moments with anything, music, anything, but try some silence so that you might actually hear the direction you should take for your life. I think you'll be more fulfilled.
That's such a great idea where every single second of our day is filled. And we were just talking about this. We're here at our mastermind in Florida, and there's background noise from the road onto Anna Maria Island where we're staying, and there's construction noise in the background. And then somebody's always using a weed whacker or a leaf blower. And I mean, in our modern world, there is almost never silence. And I think back of the time when I've heard silence, and it's when the power or the electricity to the house goes out.
Yeah.
And it's this deep silence. And it, to me, it's so comforting. And I bet to many people it's scary of like, I don't hear anything. Now you're thinking your own thoughts in your head and your own issues start to pop up. And I think most of the time we're living these lives of quiet desperation because we're not doing what you do, Hilda, of seeking out what it is we want, speaking your truth into reality and finding a way to make it happen. We're quietly, desperately hoping make a bunch of money and retire and do nothing, and we fill the silence so those questions of what we're doing with our life don't come up with Netflix, with music, with anything to not sit with ourselves. So I love that.
Oh my gosh. And if I can just interject, I was just thinking about how they used to call the TV the boob tube. Think about it, it's like a pacifier. The TV, our phones, our devices, the minute we feel nervous or anxious or lonely or sad, we just distract ourselves and we're unfortunately cutting off an opportunity for growth and reflection.
Right. When you were that last monologue before this one, I was just about to grab the microphone and be like, okay, we're done. Mic drop. Like, we don't need to, we're like, there's nothing more to say.
Yeah.
I mean, Thaddeus and I walk around our neighborhood and nobody is outside, even like when it's warm out. Or warmer out even.
Wow.
And we're like, well, what's everybody doing? So we're like curious. We're, like we're not looking in our neighbors' windows.
Peeping Toms.
Yeah, right. We're just like, like curious, like, well, there's the, giant screen TV and everybody is behind it, watching it, staring into this box of magic. It's like, it's really creepy. I think it's creepy.
Yeah.
So I think that like, I want to wrap up what you just said in your little monologue and like put it in a little Happy Meal and put it on everybody's doorstep and be like, listen to this.
So Hilda, what did we learn? What did Weston A. Price and what has the foundation? And you're the most well-traveled woman I know. You've traveled all over. You've learned the nourishing traditions and the wise traditions of elders. So like, what did we learn from them about whether it's silence or dealing with yourself or just being in the world that we're not doing today?
Oh my goodness. I hardly know where to start, but I will say, because you asked me this earlier and I maybe digressed a little bit, the Weston A. Price Foundation is based on the work and research of a dentist and researcher from the 1930s. So he was also perplexed, like, why are these kids in my clinic so sick with cavities and crowded teeth and poor behavior? He's like, something's wrong. Because he got National Geographic magazine at the same time. And he's like, these people look amazing. They've got good posture and they look resilient and happy and healthy and fertile. So he started traveling the world. And he wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. He summarized what he observed with photos. He took samples of their food and sent it back to his lab in Ohio for analysis. He was trying to get to the bottom of what are they eating, how are they living. Now, because he was a dentist, he was mostly focused on the teeth, but he saw a correlation between their dental health and their overall health. So in other words, when he was in Switzerland, the people weren't brushing their teeth. Their teeth did look really slimy, but they didn't have many cavities. And he's like, okay, what are they eating? Well, in Switzerland, it was like sourdough bread and cheeses and butter. But then he got with a Maasai. They were also not brushing their teeth. They also had a low incidences of cavities, But they were eating a very different diet. They were having meat and milk and blood. So all over the world, the diets were different, but they had things in common. So the Weston A. Price Foundation put out like 11 dietary principles. So they're very focused on food. And that's amazing. But I felt that was like a launching pad for me. So as I started traveling the world, I did notice things that every community had in common. For example, when I was in Ethiopia last summer and in Mongolia, in both places, very different landscapes. In Mongolia, it was freezing, and there were yaks and everybody was always covered up in fur and whatnot. But in both places, they woke with the sun. There was no electricity in their yurts or huts or gurs. And so they would wake when the sun rose and they were getting sun in their eyes first thing. And, that's so good for your circadian rhythm, for your mood, for your metabolism. There's like this cascade of amazing hormonal functions that get put in proper place when you get that early morning sunlight. And that's one thing that I first learned from you, Thaddeus, too, is sunrise before screen rise. So if nothing else, any entrepreneur listening or any person listening to this podcast who's like, yeah, I want to escape from corporate, you really need that pillar of health and well-being and mood, I would say, that the sun has to offer. So getting that early morning sun is critical, and it happens all over the world wherever I've been.
Is that one of your first
Absolutely.
ancestral secrets?
Yeah, it's the sun. It's the sun.
Okay.
And the sun, as my friend Matt Maruka says also, it's like a great multivitamin in the sky. It's not just the morning sun, but the midday sun. That UVA and UVB actually does great things for you on a cellular level. And each part of the spectrum of light has its healing properties and its functions. I think modern science is still catching up to traditional wisdom. We might not know the totality of what the sun offers us. Even at a glance, we can't see all the colors that it has, but our body sure knows. And Dr. Price noted in his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, that the indigenous cultural people were mostly naked, and we're the opposite. We're covered up, we're inside. So we need to get outside. We need sun breaks. I'm a big fan of the sun. That's my number one, or the first of my ancestral secrets.
Let's get outside and get naked.
Yeah. Make sure you have some privacy or you'll get arrested. But why is that against the law? It's another question to ask ourselves.
Right? Oh my gosh. So what's the most exotic place you've been?
Wow. I guess I'd have to say Mongolia.
Really?
It was
Okay.
so different from any place I'd been. And I met this sumo wrestler who turned politician there. I know, he was amazing. But he knew how to nourish himself. I think one reason he did so well with the sumo wrestling, which is more of a Japanese sport, right? He did so well with it because he was so well nourished. They eat all the entrails of the animal. They eat very traditionally nose to tail. It's, everything from yak to camel to horse on their table, and everything that comes with it. I mean, I'll never forget, I was sitting at the table with this Kazakh eagle hunter in Mongolia, and he was like scooping out the brains and handing them to me from the goat head. I was like, thank you. I know it's good for me. Sometimes I have to get over my Western mindset to enjoy it, but I was like, this is amazing. These people were conquerors. The Mongolians were able to expand their empire because of the ways in which they were nourished. And
Was the brain cooked?
I was just going to ask her that.
it was cooked.
It was.
His little head looked gray, like it'd been boiling. And but also, so the second secret I have is shivers. Traditional peoples expose themselves to the elements. We are just so comfortable. We're comfortable. And what happens when you get comfortable? You get soft, so you have to face the elements. I'm saying get out in nature more. Trust me, my Mongolian friends were not out in a tank and shorts. They were out there covered up, but their bodies were still having to work to keep them warm. So cold adaptation does not mean always jumping in an ice bath, though I enjoy that as much as the next biohacker. But at least get outside and challenge your body, because we have these ancient temperature regulatory pathways in our body that need to be stimulated, just like the mitochondria. So there's so much, I could go on and on about each thing, but getting outside and getting the sun, those two kind of go together, right?
Yeah. And you can do that for hot and cold. It doesn't always, because cold's so
Yes.
trendy right now
Yes.
too. And it's like, we have an air conditioner in our bedroom, but we wait until it's that threshold of like, okay, we're so uncomfortable, we can't sleep, because sleep's so important. So I'm
Yes.
sure that's probably on your list, but yeah, like pushing yourself to like, there's a woman that I was coaching this past year, and she was like, she said the air conditioner went out in our house because their electricity went out, and she said she went and got a hotel room. I was like, what?
Because she's so used to the temperature being a certain place.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. That variability is probably good for our heart rate variability, right?
Absolutely.
Like mix it up, challenge your mitochondria. I've heard some people say that most disease is a result of mitochondrial dysfunction, and mitochondria are like the little engines in our cells, and each cell has thousands, right? Like a lot. And so what you want to do is kind of keep them flexible and strong. And just like our bodies and muscles need workout, the mitochondria do too. So by changing the temperature up and making your body work to keep you warm or cold, it's really good for your health and your longevity.
Totally. So is sleep on your
Yes,
list?
that's the next one.
Oh, really? How
And of
did I
course,
know?
that goes hand in hand with sun too.
Wait, before we do sleep,
Okay.
can we go back to food for a minute?
Yeah.
So I wanted to have a circle back on the Weston A. Price Foundation thoughts about food and a tip for somebody listening. Because when we were talking about schools and food, schools are the number one purchaser of processed foods in our country.
Wow.
The number one, so the largest amount of processed foods is going to our children so that they can be taught what to eat as they get older and what they're going to be addicted to, in my opinion, and then buy later in adulthood. And we also know that 56% of America's diet comes from ultra processed foods, not just processed foods. So you think of like corn is a whole food, canned corn is a processed food, and then corn chips are an ultra processed food. And more than half of Americans' diet by calories comes from ultra processed foods. And the way I think about this, Hilda, is that you can either consume a food and use your life force energy to digest it and assimilate it, or you can consume food and absorb its life force energy and add to yours. And so you're either dying or using your energy to consume the food or receiving energy from the food. And I look at the Weston A. Price Foundation as like, you are focused on foods that provide healing and energy to you and not taking it from you to consume them. So are there any tips that you could just give before we close that one out? Of like
Yes.
one or two tips for someone working, at either in a home office or in a corporation of like, what could they focus on?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So, by the way, it is one of my secrets too. I call it sustenance because I like alliteration. So, we've got the sun, we've got shivers, sleep, which we will get to in a minute, and sustenance. And I would say this: don't get overwhelmed. I feel like there's so much going on in life, right? That's like a million things. You're like, how am I going to start eating healthier, quote unquote? Like, I don't even know where to start. I would just pick one thing to start with. And the foundation does recommend healthy fats. And when we say healthy fats, we don't mean canola or vegetable oil. We actually mean
Those are healthy, Hilda. They're pushed everywhere. They're on every store shelf.
I know.
Every restaurant uses canola oil. How can you say that?
Well, because it's not a wise tradition, we have to look back to see what gave people not just the energy to survive, but to thrive. These people, I'm not making it up, even people I've met now that are living according to this way are the happiest people on earth because they're well nourished. And what I didn't realize back in my exercise professional days is sometimes in the middle of my workout, I would feel my blood sugar dip and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to grab a protein bar. And I'm sure people listening feel the same way. Like, you'll be working and you get that afternoon slump. These are issues that come with the modern ways in which we're feeding ourselves. And I will say we're not actually really even feeding ourselves. We're just surviving and definitely not thriving. And it's a slippery slope down to chronic conditions of poor health, which is exactly what Dr. Price noted on his travels. So I would say to start with getting your fats straight. And I would begin by incorporating more saturated fats because these actually have nutrients in them. They're not just empty calories, so to speak, or caloric without anything behind them. So even lard has vitamin D in it. We're all saying, oh, we lack vitamin D. You can get it from food as well, from the sun. So I would say look for butter, tallow, lard, even palm oil and coconut oil if they're sustainably harvested, are rich fats that our ancestors cooked their food in. So I talked to a friend. So I do interview all these cool people on the Wise Traditions podcast. And this woman interviewed someone from a blue zone, the Nicoya Peninsula. And she asked a centenarian, this man is literally over 100 years old, what did you cook in? He said, well, lard, obviously pork fat. Like this is what we would cook the pork in and any vegetables that we would harvest or whatever. She said, well, why didn't you tell the authors of the blue zones that? And he kind of looked sheepish and was like, we were embarrassed. He said, because he knew they were looking for a different thing. They wanted to tout plant-based diets. And they were like, we know it's kind of lard was demonized for a while there, right? When Procter & Gamble came out with their Crisco or what have you, they started saying, this is not your grandmother's lard. And so they made lard seem bad. But he said, we were embarrassed. We didn't want to say.
That's huge.
I know.
mean, this is, so I've read the Blue Zones, and the author is from Minneapolis, which is like, we're in a suburb of that Twin Cities area. And so it's very familiar to everybody in our area. And every time I see the Blue Zones, like, yes, where he looked at people were living a long time, but I think that they really wanted to look at the food aspect. And that's when everyone says Blue Zones, everyone immediately thinks food. What are they eating?
Right.
And so, yes, that's a big deal. And if you look at the Blue Zones, they all, especially what Weston A. Price did, they all ate some sort of animal product. Mm-hmm. Some people were more vegetarian than others, but I don't even think that was the main reason for the longevity, but that's what everyone seems to focus on.
Yeah.
And they miss things like, oh, guess what? These people are eating animal fats
Yes.
and they're very healthy.
But yeah, those other bits, community, right? Sunshine, those things matter. How much time they're spending outside and getting in rivers that are cold or whatever, right? So lots of factors. That's why I like that I go by Holistic Hilda, because I'm like, oh yeah, it's the whole thing. It's not just one or the other. But going back to the sustenance, I would say get your fat straight, replace your country crock, which is a crock, with real butter.
And it's so crazy that my first job out of college was Procter and Gamble. And so I'm working for the hydrogenated vegetable oil, which, by the way, is now illegal in the United States to sell hydrogenated vegetable oil, that it's a trans fat. So trans fats were made illegal to add to foods, and that's what Crisco was. And then they also made Olestra while I worked there. So Olestra was that fake fat that supposedly your body cannot absorb, but it gave everybody massive diarrhea and irritable bowel syndrome. And we were the guinea pigs. So I started in the 90s working for Procter & Gamble, and they were making Olestra, just producing at the time. So they would always test everything on employees first. So they would give us all these chips made with Olestra. Like, I mean, we would have pounds, and you could take as many bags home for free as you wanted. And so we're all eating Olestra, and everyone's having all these problems. And yet they fast-tracked it and still went to market with this thing. And of course, it got recalled, and I don't think Olestra exists anymore.
No, I don't think so.
So that's like 2 strikes for Procter & Gamble of trying to take away. So Crisco was trying to mimic lard. Mm-hmm. And somehow somebody put it in the consciousness that it would be healthier, but really all it was is it could be patented and it could be marketed as healthier to get people to move away from something they could get for free on the farm and have to purchase instead from a grocery store. Mm-hmm. And that's where I see the Weston A. Price Foundation and Wise Traditions and what you're doing with 6 Ancestral Secrets. Like, a lot of the secrets that you're talking about, Hilda, I haven't heard anything that costs me a lot of money.
No.
And a lot of them are free.
Yeah.
So what gives?
Yeah, it's interesting. Where does the money trail lead, right? It's important to pay attention to that. Does the healthcare system, quote unquote, for example, really have your health in mind? What ups their bottom line? Sick people. So you don't want to fall into that category. And it might behoove you to look to the past instead of to what you're being sold for good health.
Yeah, there's some conspiracy around what you were just talking about, Thaddeus, and there was some study done, and it was all about cholesterol, right? Like back in the 80s, and that's what started scaring everybody. But they had suppressed the study somehow. Somebody just like uncovered all the flaws in that study, and then these docs would like run with this information from the study and then say, oh, like low fat, that was the big low fat craze. Mm-hmm. And then the plant-based, whatever, we can make a lot of money off this, right? Do you remember that study or that?
Well, I mean, there's the Ansel Keys study, and then there's another study. There's the China study, which is one of the long-term studies that was trying to show something around low fat and heart disease. But it's a very, very flawed study, and it was performed by people that were Seventh-day Adventists, which are vegetarians. So what I found fascinating is I'm reading a book right now, Hilda, called Metabolic. And this book is written by a medical doctor in practice for 40 years. And he worked in pediatrics, and he also worked in a few other modalities and was also a professor at the University of California for decades. And he's saying that the majority of the authors of the studies showing that meat products are bad for us, if you look at every one of those authors and scientists, they're all Seventh-day Adventists, which are trying to push a vegetarian diet.
Yes.
And I thought bias in the science leads people to think that seed oils, for example, are healthy when in fact our ancestors never could have used seed oils. And you pointed this out to us during the mastermind. What ancestral person could have pressed enough canola seeds to make enough oil to fry something in?
Why do you call it for what it is? Canola.
Well, so canola, so Heidi was just reminding me that most people don't know. Do you know, Hilda, what canola is
Yeah.
and why it's called canola? Can you tell the...
Oh, well, isn't it
listening.
made from the rapeseed? Which that name doesn't sound good for starters, right? And then wasn't it like the Canadian oil company that decided to name it canola? I remember going down the grocery store aisle. So if this is you, don't feel bad. I would go down the grocery store aisle and I was like, I have no idea which of these oils to buy. You know, one says canola, one says sunflower, it has a pretty little sunflower on it. I have no idea. And I would literally just buy the one that was on sale. But this is what I'll say. And this is probably true for you all. It's for me, hopefully for the listener as well. N equals 1. In other words, make a shift and see how it feels to you. I know people that tried to eat less meat or who switched out from they tried to eat less meat and found that they felt weak, their hair was falling out, and they were like, this isn't working for me. And even if the agenda or the people that want to sell us the lab made meat, even if they are saying this is better for the planet and better for you, you can try it and see. I think your body's going to be like, no, thank you. But pay attention to what works for you. So when you make the swap out for the butter or the saturated fats, as I'm saying, and replace those and get rid of the vegetable oils, see how you feel. Just do it for a couple weeks and that will tell you everything. And this will be kind of your inner compass, I think, for making choices based on what works for you.
That's so important. And I think that it doesn't matter if you're vegetarian or eating meat or carnivore, there are healthy fats that you can use that are not seed and vegetable oils. So coconut oil or sustainably harvested, coconut oil, other saturated fats that can be cooked with or used as a fat or oil. You can find a way to put that into your diet without using, and I'm going to say it because I did my master's thesis on the processing of vegetable oils. Like seed and vegetable oils are toxic. There is no question. The industry knew it in the 70s when they designed the manufacturing processes. They knew this. And so the very last step of a seed and vegetable oil is called a deodorization step. And they have to deodorize the oil before they package it because it smells rancid, because it is. And then we're consuming that. And so the whole thing on the lab-grown meat, Hilda, in my job, I see all these legal things come through my desk because I work on the legal side of the business for my corporate job. And the United States is the first country to approve 2 lab-grown meats. So we're recording this in February 2024. 3 to 4 months ago now, in 2023, there were 2 lab-grown meats that have been approved for sale in the United States as chicken, and they say chicken on the package. The only way that you can determine that they're lab-grown today, the only rule, is when you read the ingredient list, it says cultivated meat. And most people might think that that's a good thing. It's like, oh, it's this bougie, specially cultivated chicken, but cultivated in this case means lab grown. Is it cultured meat? Oh, so it says cultured meat. Heidi just reminded me. So it's the term, you can look this up if I'm incorrect and put it in the comments if I'm incorrect. But Heidi says cultured meat. But so cultured, again, it sounds like, hey, my chicken's cultured. It's like, it's got a lot of good things.
Yes, they've been playing Mozart for it in the hen house. Well, this is one reason I think too, you might want to find a farmer that you can trust. Get a local source of food. By the way, that's better because the infrastructure is so fragile. As we noted in 2020, it was hard for people to get the food that they wanted because it all came from certain companies and brought in by trucks to your local grocery store. If you find a local farmer, then you'll be closer to your food source and be able to identify the quality of it. This is one function of the chapter leaders of the Weston A. Price Foundation. So if you go to westonaprice.org, I'm not trying to be a commercial, but I do think this is helpful, and put find food or local chapters, you can see who's near you. And their only job as volunteers, the chapter leader's job, is to give you a list of resources for real food. Farmers markets, farms that drop off in your area, and so forth.
That's great advice. So everybody write that down, press rewind and listen to that and write all that down. When you guys were talking about all that, I'm listening back and forth and my mind's swirling and I'm like, ancestral food. And then Thaddeus is talking about this cultured chicken. And I'm like, my mind goes to the Jetsons. And how that little machine like comes and puts out the little pill in each little, like thing. And I'm like, oh my God, where are we going?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's freaky, or like, I don't know, like Hilda, what do you think? Like, are we supposed to move towards some weird stuff like in our evolution? I know it's a weird question, but like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I'm just,
I was saying, how dare you talk about evolution? It doesn't exist. Darwin was wrong.
as we move through this reality then.
Well, this is the thing. New and improved used to be a great selling point for different products on the supermarket shelf, right? I even saw this recently, actually, when I was just shopping the other day for our groceries. New and improved, like that's a good thing. But actually, in the most happy indigenous cultures in the world, they knew that what was older was revered, from the people to the traditions. And so I think it's okay. I mean, obviously we're using technology now, that's great, but we need to make sure that it serves us and that we're not serving it. And the problem is, Heidi, with some of these modern foods is we think we can improve on Mother Nature. We think we can improve on what's tried and true. And some of these things are very untested. Olestra is a case in point. They're like, oh, this is better than other kinds of fat. Oh no, heck no, it wasn't, And so I think we need to be very cautious. And maybe that's where I will invite people again to go back to stillness. I got to talk with an Aboriginal woman in Australia, and she said in our culture, we have a tradition called Dadiri, which is a deep listening and a deep knowing. And I know it's hard in this busy world. We want to go, go, go. But if we're still, we'll be able to discern, is this good for me or not? And this is going to sound very random, but I've learned through different modalities, including muscle testing, that our body will tell us if something's good for us or not if we ask it. So sometimes literally in the supermarket, I'll grab something and I'll hold it close to me and I just ask my body, like, do you want this or not? And sometimes it'll literally sway back and other times it'll sway forward. Forward means yes, back means no. If you don't want to do that at the supermarket, do it at home with different foods. But I think our body knows, so we just need to tune into that.
That's beautiful. So we're going to wrap up hour 1.
Okay.
And let's tell the listeners where they can find you again.
Okay, I will. And there are a couple more secrets for us to hit, so we can do that in hour 2.
I was just going to say, after you wrapped us up, is that stick around for hour 2. Please join us on the other side for the last 2 ancestral secrets and a couple more stories we might not tell on the public YouTube channel.
Yes, excellent. Again, I can be found at holistichilda.com. I have a few PDFs on there and resources that may be of help for folks as they navigate this crazy world of ours. And I would love to inspire people also on Holistic Hilda on Instagram. And I've got my Holistic Hilda YouTube channel and the Wise Traditions podcast.
And you have a course.
Yes, this course. It's coming out in April. I don't know when this is going to air, but yes. So it's going to be based on these secrets, because this is the thing. I want to help people apply them. Otherwise, it's just head knowledge. I want it to be heart and life knowledge that serves you well. So I'm going to give specific tips on how to incorporate these secrets into your own life.
All right, man, that's a wrap.
Is that how you end?